Welcome, everyone. We are live with another episode of Level Up Law. Every Tuesday at noon, South Carolina Legal Services levels up your legal knowledge about an area of law that we practice in. So we welcome you to our latest episode. I'm Susan Ingalls, Senior Staff Attorney and host of Level Up Law. And as always, our producer, Kenneth Elliott from our IT department, is here making sure everything's running properly for us today. And also, this is National Consumer Protection Week. So our topic today is frequently asked questions about debt collection. We are delighted as part of our kickoff of National Consumer Protection Week to bring you today's episode both in English and in Spanish. So if you registered for the Spanish version, it will start at 12:30 after this presentation with a separate link. And it will also be available on our YouTube channel, just like every episode of Level Up Law in English. So we look forward to that. Paralegal Vanessa Rodriguez from our Greenville office will be providing that Spanish version for us. So stay tuned for that. But before that, we do always want to remind you that this is not legal advice. It's just general information for the public, but it is important information. So please listen up. If you need the help of a lawyer, call our intake line here at South Carolina Legal Services or apply on. That information will be provided for you at the end of today's presentation. Also, a couple of reminders. You can always find the registration link for upcoming episodes of Level Up Law on our calendar on our website at www.sclegal.org. And all of our episodes are posted by our producer, Kenneth Elliott, to the Level Up Law playlist on our YouTube channel. And that's usually pretty quick, sometimes same day, but definitely within 24 hours. So happy National Consumer Protection Week, and let's get started. Now, scan that QR code right there before we move ahead, and you can sign up for our newsletter at South Carolina Legal Services and get all the great information that comes out in that newsletter. And we'll share that QR code again at the end of the presentation. Also, very important is this QR code, which provides a way for you, our audience, to suggest a topic for us for an upcoming episode of Level Up Law. We really appreciate you being here and supporting Level Up Law, and we want you to scan that QR code and let us know if you have a thought for us. A couple of seconds for that. And now, let's talk about debt collection. We're going to first show you a video and then answer some frequently asked questions. But the main idea for today's presentation is that when a debt collector calls, you really do need to know what your rights are. And the Federal Trade Commission, or FTC, enforces a federal law called the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. And that act makes it illegal for debt collectors to use abusive, unfair, or deceptive practices when they collect debts. So let's start with that video to kick us off. All right, hopefully that gets us off to a really good start about what we really have to look for when it comes to debt collectors calling, trying to collect debts. Let's start with the frequently asked questions. And by the way, we do thank the Federal Trade Commission for that video and other good ones that they have on their website at ftc.gov. So what types of debts are covered under the FDCPA? Well, that can be anything from credit card debt, auto loans, medical bills, and many other types of loans that you see here that are basically consumer type loans. So they are covered by the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act that we'll be talking about. Business debts, however, are not covered. So that's important to know. So let's see here. So can debt collectors contact me at any time or any place? The answer to that is no. They can't, for example, contact you before 8 a.m. or after 9 p.m. unless you agree to it. So how would you agree to that, right? So they might call you and you're about to go out the door to head to work, and the debt collector says, yeah, they're calling about this debt, and you said, well, I'm sorry, I can't talk. I'm on my way to work. I'm going out the door right now. But you can, call me tomorrow morning. If you call me between 7:30 and 7:45, I'll still be at home, and you can, call then. Okay, so then you've agreed to them to call you, for them to call you before 8. So you got to be careful about that kind of thing. Also, they can't contact you at work if you tell them you're not allowed to get calls there. So in that same conversation, debt collector calls and you say, hey, I'm on the way out the door to work. And they say, oh, no problem. I can just call you at work. What's that number? If you say, oh, here's the number, just call me at 10 o'clock, then you've agreed to that. But obviously, you can just say, no, I'm not going to give you the number. Don't call me at work. That's not allowed. Okay, so how can they contact you? They can call, send letters in the mail, and nowadays even emails and text messages. And so we need to be careful about providing those emails and text messages when we apply for these loans and other credit cards and other loans and things like that, because that may be a way for them to contact you in the future. For example, sometimes companies will ask for a reference when you're applying for a loan or a credit card, and the reference has to, have include a name and a phone number, and that may be someone that they are going to call. So you want to be careful about that. So how can we stop a debt collector from making that kind of contact and calling you and harassing you all the time, which happens a lot once you get behind? Well, you send them a letter and tell them to stop calling you. And of course, when you do a letter like that, any kind of legal type of letter, keep a copy for yourself, okay? And then I always recommend that it be sent by certified mail, and pay for that green card, that returned receipt. And that way, if you need it later on, if you need to prove that you told them to stop calling you, then you've got that proof. You've got a copy of the letter, and you've got that green certified mail card. And of course, since you're doing it by certified mail, be sure to put the date on your letter so you can tie that letter to that green card. Now, once they get your letter, all they can do is they got to stop calling you. But they can call you and say, okay, we're going to stop calling you. Okay, they can call you, contact you that one more time. But if they tell you that what their next action is going to be, which they're allowed to do in that call, just be careful and don't let that end up having them engage you in conversation, because they may say, oh, well, we're going to file a lawsuit, or we're going to have to get a lien on your house, or whatever other threat it might be. Sometimes that is calculated to try to get you to make a payment that you already have determined you can't make. you know, something's happened, your finances have gone awry, and you can't make the payment. So don't let them force you to with threats like that. Now, also, if you are represented by an attorney, you need to tell them, okay? And then once they know you have an attorney, name and phone number needs to be given to them, and then they have to contact that attorney about your situation rather than you. Of course, warning, you know, you can't give them an attorney's name and phone number just because you talked to the attorney. You have to have that official representation, agreement with the attorney that they are going to be handling this for you. And that way they'll know that if this debt collector calls, they are allowed to respond. And they need to do so within a reasonable time. Otherwise, it kind of kicks back to the debt collector and they can start calling you again. So definitely make sure you do that right. And one warning, you know, about contacting the debt collector and calling them or talking to them on the phone. You certainly can consider talking to them at least once if you're needing information, like, you know, I don't think this is my debt. You know, tell me more about it. But also you need to be careful that this isn't a scam, because there are scammers out there who will, you know, randomly get a copy of your credit card statement, maybe. You know, you should always shred those, right? Don't just throw them in the trash. But if you have someone call you and they're, you know, asking you for personal information, maybe they have your account number. They're saying, oh, give me the last 4 digits of your social security number. No, don't do that. Because they should know that. If they're a legit debt collector, they should have all your information. You should not have to be providing anything. You should be asking them questions. Okay, can a debt collector contact anyone else about my debt? Yes, as I mentioned before, you might have given someone's name and phone number as a quote unquote reference. And so they can call that person. But typically, the only way that they can call someone else is if they're trying to find you. For example, if you moved and they don't have a good address on you anymore, or you've changed phone numbers and you know they're not able to get in contact with you that way either, they can call that other person and say, hey, do you know where you know, Jane Doe is? Do you have her address or her phone number? I'm trying to locate her. What they can't say in that conversation is that it's about a debt that they're collecting, because that's your personal information and they can't do that. And also, they can only call once. We do see a lot of cases where a debt collector will repeatedly call this other person, maybe a family friend or relative or someone whose name you gave as a reference, and they keep calling them and harassing them once they're not, you know, calling and harassing you. And that's a violation of the FDCPA when they do that. Okay, what do they have to tell you about the debt? This is called validation information. So the debt collector is supposed to give you information, right? They're not supposed to be asking you for it. They got to tell you 4 little bits of information. How much money they say you owe. What's the name of the creditor that they're saying you owe it to? Because they're a debt collector. They're not the original creditor that you incurred the debt with, right? They're a debt collector. So they've got to say who they're collecting that debt for. Maybe they're collecting it for Discover Card or something like that. They've got to tell you that. They've got to tell you how to get the name of who the original creditor is if they're not telling you who it is. And what to do if you don't think it's your debt. Now, usually that's going to be, oh, it must be identity theft, and you have to file a police report and this kind of thing. If you really do think it's identity theft, then you can report that to the FTC. That they are a law enforcement entity with the federal government, so that's just as good as contacting the police and doing a police report. Probably better, because it's their job to look into these things. Okay, and this is an important one. What if I don't think I owe the debt? So if you don't recognize the debt, if they've sent you something in the mail or told you on the phone a particular debt, get an address and send them a letter and ask for verification of the debt. Okay, so remember, once you've gotten that validation information, those four things they're supposed to tell you, if you don't recognize the debt or you don't think it's yours, then you send that debt collector a dispute letter and say, I don't know this, and you need to verify it. Okay, so send that dispute letter within 30 days of that contact. And when they receive that dispute letter, they can't contact you anymore until they send you written verification of the debt. Now, in reality, lots of times debt collectors will just send a letter of verification without doing anything to verify the debt. They'll just say, oh yes, we've already verified it, we have this information, and they just send you a verification letter. So that should not be the end of the discussion for you. You should definitely continue to look into it. And of course, when you send that dispute letter, always do that by certified mail, as we talked about before. Next, frequently asked questions is, what are they not allowed to do? Okay, debt collectors can't harass you, they can't lie to you, and they can't treat you unfairly. And these are just some examples of what we often see debt collectors do. They might threaten to hurt you. They might use curse words. They might continue to repeatedly call you. If they're calling you like all day long on the same day, that's harassment. They can't do that. And they might lie to you. They can't tell you that you owe a different amount than what you actually owe. They can't pretend to be an attorney, pretend to be from the government. We see a lot of that. It's the IRS calling and you have to come pay immediately or you're going to jail, those kinds of calls, that violates the act. That's not how the IRS works. And this is important. They can't tell you you're going to be arrested, right? We get that a lot. They say, well, yeah, if you don't pay your debts, you're going to jail. Well, we don't have that. We don't have debtor's prison where you go to jail for debts. Now, a couple of exceptions are things like child support. That's the one that comes to mind. But for your regular just consumer debt, like we're talking about today, they can't put you in jail for that. And treating you unfairly, here's some examples of that. They can't add money or amounts to the original debt just to make more money for themselves, unless there's some sort of a contract or a law that says they're allowed to include those additional amounts. They can't deposit a post-dated check early, and really they're not supposed to take a post-dated check at all. And they cannot publicly reveal your debts. A couple of the ways that that has been done in the past is sending you a postcard. Please come pay $50 to Citibank right away at this address. And that postcard other people might see because it's not in an envelope, and that violates your privacy. And the same thing happens if they put it on the outside of an envelope. Okay. Here's a question that's also important. You might have more than one debt that a debt collector is trying to collect. I've had this happen for clients before. And you can choose which debt you're making a payment on, but you've got to make sure that you're really clear about that so that they don't apply it to the wrong debt. All right, what if I get sued? And that may happen if you dispute a debt, if you ignore these harassing phone calls. Ultimately, the next thing that may happen is they file a lawsuit against you to collect the debt. So it's really important at that juncture to know not to ignore that and not to be scared of it either. You should answer the lawsuit, and if you are in need of an attorney to help you with that, you can definitely apply to South Carolina Legal Services or get an attorney some other way, and they can help you with filing an answer to that complaint. It's probably not the best idea to go to some online service because every state is different, and that definitely applies here in South Carolina. There's certainly things that we would recommend to you when answering a lawsuit that might not be part of what some other online help desk might tell you to do. So definitely try to get an attorney first off. And there is one thing you can do. We have another video on our YouTube channel called What to Do If You're Sued by a Debt Collector. We have several other videos just about debt collection in general, and we also have an online classroom to help walk you through a debt collection lawsuit if that happens to you. So we'll link those down below. All right, can they take money from my paycheck or my bank account? No, they can't do that in South Carolina. How about that? Most states can garnish wages and things like that, but in South Carolina, these type of consumer debts are subject to that only in very extremely limited circumstances. And we'll be attaching a graphic that we have that gives the details on that and how that works here in South Carolina. But mainly, the important thing to remember, no wage garnishment for consumer debt in South Carolina. So you really don't need to worry about that. So keep in mind that paying debts, even though you're under a contract and you promise to pay back the money that you borrowed, making those payments, it's voluntary. If you're unable to make them, versus keeping the lights on or putting food on the table, that's a situation where you may not be able to pay that particular debt as you had promised, and so that's not an illegal thing, okay, to not be able to pay a debt because of your circumstances. So to force you to pay, other than you just volunteering to pay after they pressure you, you want to have a judge. They would have to have a judgment against you, and that means filing that lawsuit that we just talked about. And if they have a judgment and they're trying to collect that from you, you are entitled to exemptions by law in South Carolina, and you do have the right to have a judge determine if those exemptions apply in your case with your judgment. So just keep all of that in mind. And again, we have some videos on that as well. And I just wanted to also mention the South Carolina Consumer Protection Act, because it does protect South Carolina residents from abusive, unfair, and deceptive debt collection, not just by a debt collector, but also by the original creditor. And so that's important to keep in mind, because even if the collection doesn't violate the FDCPA because it's not a debt collector, it's that original creditor, under our South Carolina law, you can still be protected. And again, we have a great YouTube video on the South Carolina Consumer Protection Act as well. And you can check out the South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs, which has a lot of great information on their website about that. All right. So that's it for debt collection FAQs. I want to thank the Federal Trade Commission for the video that we showed you and the great information that they have on their website about debt collection and the frequently asked questions that they see. And that concludes today's presentation. In this final slide, there's that QR code again where you can sign up for our newsletter. And I also want to thank our paralegal in our Greenville office, Vanessa Rodriguez, who will be presenting this same presentation in Spanish for our Spanish-speaking audience, and that will start momentarily at 12:30. So anybody that wants to tune in and hear this in Spanish, definitely go check that out if you haven't already registered on the calendar on our website. And as always, let me remind our listeners, we will post a recording of today's episode on our YouTube channel. We'll do that with the Spanish version as well. Just look up the Level Up Law playlist on YouTube at South Carolina or SC Legal Services. And if you go to our webpage, our YouTube page, any of our social media, please follow us, like, subscribe, all of that wonderful stuff, so you can help us out with our reach to all the people that need this information. And also sign up for notifications, so every time we post a video, you'll know that it's there. Now, we do want as many people as possible to get this important information from today. They may not need it, but they probably know someone who does. So definitely go to the YouTube channel and share it out as well. And be sure to tune in next week for our next episode, where we'll be explaining the registration of home births in South Carolina. And I want to thanks again to Vanessa, who will be providing today's presentation in Spanish through that separate registration link, and also producer Kenneth. And thanks to you, our audience, for tuning in today on Level Up Law. That concludes today's webinar. Thanks, everybody.